Have you ever heard a sound so strange, so out of place, that it made every hair on your body stand up? A sound that your brain just can't process? I want to tell you a story. It's a story I pieced together from old police reports, hushed local legends, and a series of letters that were never meant to be found. And I have to warn you, this one gets dark. It's about what can happen when the thing that's supposed to protect you becomes the very thing you should fear most. Our story begins in a quiet, forgotten corner of rural America, back in the late 70s. We follow a young couple, let's call them Mark and Sarah. They just bought their first home, a charming, if a little run-down farmhouse on a huge plot of land. It was their dream, secluded, peaceful, a place to start a family. The first few weeks were idyllic. They painted walls, planted a garden, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets. But then the noises started. At first it was subtle, a faint scratching from inside the walls. They assumed it was mice. They laid traps, but they always remained empty, untouched. The scratching continued, sometimes sounding less like an animal and more like fingernails on wood. One night Sarah woke up convinced she heard a faint, whispery voice coming from the old floor vents. Mark told her it was just the wind, the house settling. He was trying to be rational, but even he couldn't explain the cold spots that moved around the house or why the dog would sometimes just stare, hackles raised, at an empty corner of the room, whining low in its throat. The real terror began with the baby monitor. Sarah had just given birth to a little girl, Emily. One evening, as they sat downstairs watching TV, a sound crackled through the receiver. It wasn't the baby crying, it was a voice, a low, guttural, melodic voice, humming a lullaby they had never heard before. Mark bolted up the stairs, heart pounding, and threw open the nursery door. Emily was fast asleep in her crib, peaceful. The room was silent, empty. He tried to convince Sarah it was radio interference, a stray signal from a neighbor. But they didn't have any close neighbors. And the voice on the monitor, it sounded like it was right next to the crib. This is where the story takes a turn. This isn't a ghost story. What they were experiencing wasn't paranormal. It was something far, far worse. You see, Mark, desperate for an explanation, started digging into the history of the house. He found out the previous owner was a reclusive old man who had died years ago. But before him, back in the 1950s, the house was owned by a doctor who had lost his license for performing unethical experiments. The locals whispered that he was obsessed with human anatomy, with survival, with how long a person could live in extreme conditions. One night, the baby monitor crackled to life again. This time, it wasn't humming. It was a man's voice, clear as day. He whispered, "Such a beautiful baby. Looks just like her mother." In that single, terrifying moment, Mark understood. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't interference. The voice wasn't coming through the vents. It was coming from them. He grabbed a crowbar from the garage, his hands shaking. Ripping up the floorboards in the hallway, he uncovered a hidden crawl space between the floors. And inside was a man. He was emaciated, pale, with long matted hair and eyes that glowed with a terrifying lucidity in the beam of Mark's flashlight. He'd been living in the walls of their house the entire time. The son of the disgraced doctor, left behind, forgotten. He had created a labyrinth of passages and peepholes, watching them, listening to them, becoming a part of their home. He was the house's secret. He was the scratching, the whispers, the cold spots. The police reports from that night are heavily redacted. But the local legend says the man had been living in those walls for over 20 years, surviving on whatever he could scavenge, a phantom in his own home. He wasn't haunting the family, he was studying them, waiting. So the next time you hear a strange noise in your home, a creak in the floorboards or a whisper on the wind, just tell yourself it's the house settling. Because the alternative, the idea that someone could be in the walls just inches away watching you, listening to you breathe while you sleep, well, that's a horror that's all too real.